issue of unemployment in the past hasn't really been a huge issue for synagogues and other nonprofits, but has turned into quite an important issue at this time. Don, can I get you to enable screen sharing so that I could share my screen here? All right, so hopefully everybody could see the slides I have up here on the screen, and I'm going to run through a few things on unemployment that relate specifically to nonprofits and synagogues. There's a little bit about my background there, but hopefully most people I'm familiar with on the call here. So Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code exempts certain organizations, such as nonprofits, that are organized and operated exclusively for religious purposes and other things from unemployment taxes, from federal unemployment taxes. And all 501c3 organizations are nonprofit, but not all nonprofit organizations are 501c3 exempt. To receive an exemption, an organization must apply to the Internal Revenue Service, and when approved, the IRS would send the organization an exemption letter. So that's sort of the initial process there. Some services are specifically excluded from the word employment for the purposes of the Missouri Employment Security Law. I'm not going to spend our time here. I want to focus on exempted employers versus the services that are exempted. The law in Missouri refers to churches and religious orders. Basically, the law says that services performed in the employ of a church or convention or association of churches, services performed in the employ of an organization which is operated primarily for religious purposes, and which is operated, supervised, controlled, or principally supported by a church or convention or association of churches. Services performed by a duly ordained, commissioned, or licensed minister of a church in the exercise of the ministry. And finally, services performed by a member of a religious order in the exercise of duties required by such order. So that's really the church and religious order exemption. And these organizations are generally exempt for unemployment insurance coverage for the services performed for those organizations. Those whose employees are not entitled to regular unemployment compensation, that would include synagogues, affiliated religious organizations, day schools, nonprofits with fewer than 4 employees on any given 20 days within a calendar year. So the synagogue itself is in all likelihood going to be exempt from unemployment. But if you have a religious organization within the synagogue, such as a religious school, the employees of that religious school, if you have 4 or more employees, then they are going to be subject to unemployment compensation. So there's a distinction between the synagogue itself and then the rest of the organizations that may be operating within the temple. If a 501c3 organization does not have sufficient employment to become liable under the above conditions that I just listed, or if it wishes to provide unemployment coverage for its workers who normally would be exempt under some provision in the law, the organization may request approval by the Division of Employment Security to become a quote-unquote employer. And if that's approved, the voluntary election of coverage would go into effect on the first day of the quarter in which the election is requested, and then would continue in effect for at least 2 complete calendar years. And then there's, basically, if a 501c3 organization elects coverage, all employment normally exempted under the law would then be covered. Okay, so there's a process to go through if the organization elects to be covered, and we'll talk in a little bit more detail on that in a minute. There is a worker notification requirement if an employee of a religious organization is exempt from unemployment insurance coverage as defined under the Employment Security Law. The law requires a written notice from the employer to the exempted worker, and that notice must contain a couple of things. So Hopefully these items that I'm discussing with you, these are things that should have already been done by your organization. And if employees are exempted, they would have already been provided notice. I'm not going to talk in detail at all about the quarterly reporting requirements. I just want you to know that there are quarterly reporting requirements. There are penalties for late filing of contribution and wage reports, and there's also interest charges that are due after if there's unpaid benefits after each quarterly due date. Now, one thing I want to talk about is I'm going to stop on this slide for a minute and talk about the concept of a reimbursable employer. When liability is established, governmental entities and 501c3 nonprofits have the option to elect their method of payment. And an election to make payments to reimburse the Missouri Unemployment Compensation Fund in lieu of contributions for the amount of unemployment insurance benefits paid to former employees who've been determined to be eligible claimants. This is the reimbursement method. This must be made in writing within 30 days of the date of the original notice of liability is mailed, or at least 30 days prior to January 1 of a calendar year for which such election shall be effective. If no request is received, the Division of Employment Security automatically assigns the contributing method of taxation. And I'm going to talk about that on the next slide. That's the second method there. So an election to make payments in lieu of contributions, taxes cannot be changed to the contributing method for 2 full calendar years. So this is the reimbursement method. If your employees, if you have decided as a synagogue or other applicable nonprofit religious organization to participate in the unemployment insurance mechanism under the state, the 2 methods again are reimbursable and contributory. Reimbursable just means that you are not paying unemployment taxes into the state of Missouri. And when employees file claims for unemployment, you are then reimbursing the state of Missouri at that time for the amount of the unemployment claims. Okay, so hopefully that is somewhat clear to everyone. So the next method is the contributory employer. All employers, except for those making reimbursing payments, have an assigned tax rate. And a contributory employer makes quarterly tax payments based on the employer's taxable wages and rates. Initially, the employer receives the new employer rate. The tax rate for a new 501c3 corporation is 1% until it establishes it's eligible for an experience rate. Applicable rates may increase or decrease depending on that experience rate. Unemployment claims against this account and taxes previously paid by the employer are included in this ratio of determining what that percentage rate would be. An employer's rate generally stays the same for the entire calendar year, except in a situation called successorship, and I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Again, just kind of by way of background on unemployment generally, there is a benefit charge. That's kind of a formula that Missouri goes through that basically the maximum amount of regular unemployment insurance benefits chargeable on a Missouri claim within a benefit year is 20 times the maximum weekly benefit amount, so $6,400 under normal circumstances. So again, talking about contributory employers, contributory employers have account charge protection, meaning that benefit payments are not charged to a contributory employer's experience if it is found that the claimant quit the employment to accept employment with greater compensation or failed without good cause to accept work offered by a former employer, or the claimant was disqualified for being discharged due to misconduct connected with the work, or quit for good cause attributable to the work. The claimant was paid less than $400. Was paid $400 or less by the employer during the entire base period of the claim, and a couple of other circumstances as well that I'm not going to bore you with. Reimbursable employers are charged for benefits in the same ratio as the amount of wages paid to a claimant by such employer during the base period of the claim, relative to the claimant's other employers, if any. So reimbursable employers are billed directly for the entire amount of the regular unemployment insurance benefits, and one half of state paid employee benefits paid attributable to the base period wages, except that there's an exception for reimbursable government entities. I won't bore you with that either. Uh, I'm going to skip the next things here. Just know that there's a statement of benefits charges that you would receive from the Division of Employment Security each quarter, showing what's been charged against the account, and then there's a way to terminate liability if you've elected to be covered by the unemployment insurance mechanism. There's a way to terminate that election as well. So that's just a really quick overview of unemployment insurance in Missouri. And the general mechanism that's in place. I want to shift gears because I know most people are probably really interested in how the Missouri's unemployment program and the CARES Act interact, how it all works together. And with the unknown duration of the COVID-19 crisis and impact on many entities' abilities to operate, employers really across the country are seeking to implement cost-cutting measures, including full-blown reductions in force, furloughs of employees or temporary layoffs, reduced pay, work weeks as a way to scale back costs while maintaining a connection to employees whose help will be critical to restarting normal operations whenever that might be. So the federal government stepped up with the CARES Act to better ensure impacted employees will have access to health care and financial support. Although the CARES Act was really quite hastily put together, it's very difficult to read all 800 plus pages of it that I've been through more times than I would like to admit. Thankfully, the Department of Labor has released some guidance, including the unemployment insurance program letters recently. And given a close read of those letters, I hope to describe the unemployment aspects of the CARES Act, describe some of the key elements of the Missouri unemployment program that are impacted by the CARES Act, and explain what we know so far about CARES Act implementation in Missouri, and talk about some special cases, namely the impact on nonprofits and religious organizations. So the first couple of things that took place here, there were two phases of legislation. The initial legislation was designed to allow states to loosen their eligibility requirements. It suggested, and I use that word intentionally, suggested allowing COVID reasons and getting rid of the waiting week, but it did not tie federal money to anything. Next came the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, and that was mainly about leave, but it also reiterated the unemployment loosening. But a lot of states didn't respond to these two pieces of legislation. And so clearly something more coercive was needed. And hence my little cartoon up there. The federal government then implemented the CARES Act to not necessarily coerce, but I'll use a kinder word here, encourage, how about that, help or persuade the states to make some pretty dramatic modifications to their unemployment mechanisms. So they passed the CARES Act, and all in all, it created the ability to make massive changes to state unemployment eligibility requirements. And you could see what it really did on your screen there. I'm going to run through some of these changes with you. So there are some really important changes under Section 2103 of the CARES Act. It authorizes the Department of Labor to issue guidance to allow states to interpret their state unemployment compensation laws in a manner that would provide maximum flexibility to reimbursing employers as it relates to timely payment and assessment of penalties and interest. It also provides for transfers to a state's account in the unemployment trust fund from the federal unemployment account to allow partial reimbursements. So generally 50% of the amount of payments in lieu of contributions to state and local governmental entities, certain nonprofit organizations, and federally recognized Indian tribes. So I want to reiterate this slide. This is very important for everyone on the call here. The Section 2103 Emergency Unemployment Relief of Governmental Entities and Nonprofit Organizations. What it does is it allows these entities to cut their payments in lieu of the state unemployment taxes, generally by 50%. The weeks of unemployment from March 13 through December 31, 2020 are covered. So right as Missouri was starting to go down the path of shutting things down in the county and in the city of St. Louis, and then followed about 10 days later by the state, if you have unemployment claims from March 13 through December 31 of this year, you are generally going to be able to cut your state unemployment tax by 50%. The Department of Labor is also authorized to issue guidance to allow states to interpret their unemployment compensation to provide for this maximum flexibility. Self-insured nonprofits should, if you're one of those reimbursable employers, you should monitor the websites of the state Department of Division of Employment Security here in Missouri to look for further developments on this, okay? So some other key changes here. Section 2108 of the CARES Act, what it does is it fully funds pre-existing state short-term compensation and work share programs, and to fund by 50% any new programs that a state might enact. So work share or short-time compensation is a way to spread the reduction of hours to an entire group or a unit of employees instead of laying them all off. Very importantly, under the CARES Act, if employees receive even $1 of state unemployment compensation, so if you have one of these work share or short-term compensation programs that are put in place, and you have to seek approval of this from the state of Missouri, but if you put this in place and you have an employee that receives just even $1 of state unemployment compensation, they will receive an additional $600 per week through July 31 of this year, and that's federal government. So the maximum benefit in Missouri under state law is $320 a week. They might be able to get as much as $320 a week under state law, and then an additional $600 per week under federal law. So I will talk a little bit more about the benefits that folks are entitled to. The idea behind this is to, instead of laying off 25% of a group of employees, the employer can reduce the hours of all employees in the group by 25%. And so most states have a reduction range, like Missouri is 20 to 40%. So as long as you're reducing the hours of all employees by 20 to 40%, or all employees in a particular group by 20 to 40%, you could sort of spread that reduction of hours or that unemployment across a lot of people instead of just laying off one or two people or more people. So there is this mechanism under the law. There's a lot of advantages for the employer here. The employer, there's employee retention. You avoid the cost of rehiring. There's skill retention. There's a morale issue versus a layoff. And right now, through December 31, 2020, it's not chargeable to a contributory employer in states where it already exists. 50% of it's not chargeable in states that have to enact one. So Missouri already has in place, or had in place, one of these work share programs. And so if you apply to the state of Missouri for approval of one of these work share programs, then that's not chargeable against the employer's account. Also eliminates that, so that eliminates the risk of an employer tax rate going up as a result. There's many advantages to, apologize here, I have a call coming in that I will turn that off. So there's a lot of advantages to the employers under this. There are some drawbacks. It's a state administered program. And like I said, the employer has to apply and meet all the criteria. It takes time for approval from the state. So just keep that in mind if you decide to pursue that. Um, some more key changes: the waiting week waiver to help encourage the states that had not yet waived the waiting week requirement to do so. The CARES Act provided funding to states for the coverage of the initial week of unemployment. Missouri did sign on to this after the CARES Act was put in place. Let's talk about some of the massive changes that were put in place by the CARES Act. And as you could see, as I've described on your screen there, there was this federal pandemic unemployment compensation program that was put in place. This is that $600 per week that runs through July through July 31, and this is on top of state unemployment. And again, I want to stress, if the employees are receiving even $1 of unemployment compensation from the state of Missouri, they will also get this $600 per week. There's another program that was put in place called the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, or PUA. This covers more people. It lasts 39 weeks, minus weeks on regular unemployment compensation and any state extended benefits. So this is designed to cover many more people, such as people who previously weren't eligible for unemployment, including folks who are perhaps self-employed, or a lot of gig economy workers, the Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, delivery drivers, etc. There's another program that was put in place under the CARES Act called the Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation, or PEUC. I think they could have chosen much better words for this, because to me that always looks kind of like puke. But come on, that's supposed to be funny. Doesn't anybody find that entertaining? Yeah, thanks for smiling, Rachel. I appreciate that. So the compensation under this, it basically extends exhausted benefits by 13 weeks. So in Missouri, employees are entitled to up to 20 weeks of unemployment compensation. Through the PEUC, they are entitled to an additional 13 weeks under federal law. So they can extend that to 33 weeks. It's possible it could go all the way to 39 weeks with the pandemic unemployment assistance, and then that $600 a week. So you could see that it significantly enhanced the amount of unemployment compensation people were entitled to. So like I said before, more people are now eligible. This includes business owners, self-employed individuals, independent contractors, gig economy workers. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide. Just know that it was dramatically expanded. Now, this pandemic unemployment assistance is only applicable if you have one of these reasons listed on the screen there. And I'm going to let you read that yourself, but basically it has to be a COVID-19 related reason for people to get these types of unemployment insurance that we've been talking about. Basically, the summary at the bottom there: individuals who are able to telework with pay or who are receiving sick leave or other paid leave benefits are not eligible. If people could still come to work, or if you offer them the ability to telework, but they choose not to telework, they're generally not going to be able to apply for these benefits. If they're at home teleworking, then they're not unemployed. So they're not going to be entitled to unemployment. Seems fairly obvious there. So let's talk a little bit about state coverage versus the PUA coverage. The state made changes. The states made changes to their unemployment laws to help with COVID-19 related issues. So, for example, Missouri already disregarded the waiting week before the CARES Act was implemented. The question is, will they still get 100% federal funding on that? It's a preemption question. And so basically you could see that, and I'm going to have to move my little window here so I could see the slide on the screen there. So Missouri already had waived that waiting week, and there were some states that were more lenient than others. There's a question that remains: can you jump between state unemployment and the pandemic unemployment insurance? And so that's a question that the Department of Labor has not answered for us yet. which is why I suggest that you continue to check the Department of Labor's website. I mentioned before that the changes extended coverage for up to 39 weeks. State unemployment benefits are extended 13 weeks for a total potential unemployment coverage of up to 39 weeks. There's a question here in Missouri whether it's actually going to be 33 weeks or 39 weeks, given the maximum eligibility or length of unemployment in Missouri. So the state unemployment benefits are extended here for that 13 additional weeks. Some states like Missouri only offer 20 weeks under traditional unemployment compensation. So the pandemic unemployment compensation would only bring that up to a total of 33 weeks, but that's only the pandemic unemployment insurance compensation. They still may get some additional time under the PUA, which is the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance. So that's going to be available to individuals who exhaust their state benefits and have a COVID-19 reason for unemployment. So that's available for 39 weeks. So combining all of this, I think you are fairly safe to tell your employees who you may be laying off that they're probably going to be entitled to a total of 39 weeks of unemployment. Certainly they'll be entitled to 33 weeks, but they may be entitled to as much as 39. And for unemployment through July 31 of this year, they're going to be entitled to that additional $600. And that's, of course, what I've put up on the next slide here about the additional $600 once again. So I will let you all read that yourself. So what do you tell your employees? Obviously, you're not going to advise employees on unemployment coverage. It's a state agency decision, but you could tell employees how to apply and refer them to the state FAQs and resource pages. You go to the Missouri Division of Employment Security. You could certainly tell them that it's your understanding, like I said before, that you might get 33 weeks or up to 39 plus the additional 600 weeks, but you're not going to explain the details of all of that because, of course, they have to actually apply and then meet certain eligibility and income requirements. You should inform employees as to the impact on their leave banks, health insurance, 401ks, et cetera, other potential impacts. The Missouri Unemployment Program, at a quick glance here, this is kind of how it works. And we'll make the slides available to you so that you don't have to try to scramble to write all this down real quickly here. But this is basically how the process works. And the flow chart really goes through the very basics of the Missouri Unemployment Program. And you set up an account, you pay into the account. If you're a contributory employer, remember that you may be a reimbursable employer. You may have elected that option previously. The CARES Act, what you need to know, relevant Missouri unemployment programs, again, is kind of just a summary here on what it takes to be eligible for unemployment. There's partial benefits that are available. Again, it's that shared work program that I talked to you about previously. The Missouri Unemployment Program under the CARES Act, again, kind of highlighting that the CARES Act broadened the eligibility requirements of unemployed workers for benefits, and no charge to the employer accounts for CARES Act benefits. That's coming from the federal law. Missouri signed on to this on March 29. So those benefits are available, and the Missouri Division of Employment Security is administering all of this. When are these additional benefits available? They are available now. Missouri began paying these out on April 12. Missouri expects to begin processing PUA claims on April 19 and the PEUC claims on April 26. So all of this is supposed to be in effect. We have seen some things in the news where they're saying that there are some delays and the system's getting a bit overwhelmed, but hopefully the state of Missouri is getting a handle on that. And I apologize for not being a little more certain on some of this. It's just, as we all know, the whole issue is fluid here. So here's a little summary from that reflects the coordination of the various benefits and how we can get either to the 33 weeks or 39 weeks. And so you should keep in mind the information on the slide. And again, we'll make these available to you. How long can Missouri unemployment last? And again, I've kind of summarized here so you have a little bit of information to share with your employees how long the benefits might last. So the big things for you all is the Missouri Division of Employment Security website. Also, my firm is maintaining a very comprehensive site with everything COVID-19 related. I've been on my firm's COVID-19 task force, advising clients around the country on a lot of these issues, including things that we're starting to shift gears and focus on returning to work. You're welcome to access that. There is a ton of information on our website that applies to local employers, national employers, and international employers that will help guide you through some of these COVID-19 issues. Finally, I would also say that the Jewish Federation of North America has put out some guidance on the CARES Act. And if you give me 1 second here, I'm going to try to share that link with you. They have a decent Q&A on there. You can see my, hopefully, here it is, sharing the right thing with you here. It's cdn.fedweb. Hopefully you're able to see my screen with that, but cdn.fedweb.org. And then there's a longer link there. I'm going to copy this link and post it into the chat, and that way you all will be able to copy it out of the chat and go there. And like I said, it's in kind of a Q&A format that may be useful to you as you try to navigate some of those issues. So that kind of concludes the portion, the PowerPoint portion. I hope that it was useful, and I'm going to now paste this in the chat and turn it back over to Don or to David or anyone else who has any questions.
So before I hand it to David, there was a question that's come up a couple of times. What about those who have no unemployment insurance or have not been paid?
Yeah, so if you are exempt, then the employees would still try to go file under state law, and it's up to the state to determine whether they're going to qualify for any of these federal benefits or not. All of these federal programs that I've run through, these are being administered by the states, and the State Division of Employment Security will determine if there's any eligibility. So if you're one of those exempt employers that we talked about way back on one of these prior slides here, and you have not elected to be covered by the state unemployment insurance program, then it's very possible your employees may not be entitled to unemployment insurance compensation. Now, again, that also presupposes that you've done things correctly and you notified the employees of this fact at the outset of the employment relationship. So there could be some issues that creep up under those circumstances.
Thanks. David, you have any comments before we start taking questions? Excuse me.
Well, I think that was a hugely helpful explanation of the process and of all the different benefits. And I think, to Bert's point, we're still trying to work through a lot of the questions that have been raised. But here's the thing that we're getting from the Division of Employment Security, and we've been able to interface quite a bit with them. The process is Bert alluded to, an employee has to request unemployment benefit from the state. They're going to be denied if they're not part of a qualified class for state unemployment, and that is kicking them into a separate category. And as I understand it from Employment Security, they will be reaching back out to those employees. There's a whole, you apply online, there's a correspondence tab there that the employee can look at to see if you can funnel into one of the federal programs. It is our understanding at this point that the state intends to allow for employees of exempt organizations to be able to utilize, and I always get these letters mixed up, but be able to utilize, I think it's the PUA program, which is a program, as Bert alluded to, that is really there for otherwise ineligible employees, self-employed, gig economy, that kind of thing. And then if you make it into that category, then you are also going to be, you're going to end up on the FPUC as well, which is the additional $600 per week. So at this point, the guidance we're getting is the state intends to allow individuals from exempt employers, the under fours, the religious groups, to be able to access these benefits. We will continue to ask that question. My understanding is they have started reaching out to those employees. So it's going to be very interesting if people are keeping in touch with their employees to find out what their success has been and what it hasn't been. The only thing that I want to stress is none of those decisions can be made until the employee actually goes on the website through Employment Security and puts in their application. That's what starts this whole ball rolling. And they need to be checking back on that site regularly and checking that correspondence tab. Bert, does that sound consistent?
It sounds completely consistent. I'm actually really glad to hear the insight that you've provided, that you're getting word that the Division of Employment Security is going to be trying to approve people under the PUA. I mean, one of the things that's gone on under the CARES Act and also the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, there's a measure of, for lack of a better term, a measure of good faith in all of this. And part of it is that the Department of Labor at the federal level and the Departments of Labor at the state level are being encouraged, and they've actually used the word encouraged in their guidance. They're being encouraged to be flexible and expansive with all of this relief. And they are also using that word encourage again on getting employers to work with their employees to sort of maximize the benefits under these various laws. So, David, that's encouraging. Use that word again. That's encouraging. Yeah. That you've gained that insight, and I'd love to hear back from anyone who's on the call right now, who's on the program, if their employees are eventually successful in getting unemployment, if they historically worked for an exempt organization and your organization did not elect to participate in the unemployment insurance mechanism.
Yeah, and I want to be just clear before we jump there. This is all based on the conversations that we've been having with the folks at Employment Security to backstop this. But there's so much guidance, there's so much changing guidance right now that's coming out that every one of these programs is essentially a work in progress. And I think to Bert's point, there is a ton of good faith that's being kind of engaged. Frankly, bureaucrats aren't used to jumping off ledges. This is not a comfortable position for them. And so imperfect guidance is extremely complicated for folks to get through within a state department or a state division. And so we're just going to keep plugging away at this and advocating for as expansive of policies humanly possible for everybody. And we will continue to provide updates through the Federation website. Don, I think Bert's covered other than that, I don't see really any kind of role for me at this point.
You just hang in there. We'll figure it out. Don't run away. A couple of questions. So if you want to submit, there's a couple of questions in chat that I'll start to go through. If you have any other questions, just put them in chat now. We'll get through them. We have about 19 people on the call, so it should be pretty manageable. So a question about what about seasonal employees who normally don't work over the summer? I would imagine like hourly employees, teachers, et cetera. I mean, is there anything unique to that where taxes are withheld? So.
Yeah, so for seasonal employees, there's a calculation that they would go through on the website, Division of Employment Security's website, and they would plug in their income over the various quarters, and then the website would kick out a result of that calculation, telling people whether they're eligible or not, if their seasonal employment qualified them for unemployment compensation.
Would that be the same approach for teachers, or?
Yes, that's a good question. I think so, but most teachers, well, that's not necessarily true. I think a lot of teachers are paid over the course of an entire year, even though they don't work the full 12 months. For teachers who are not paid over the course of the entire year, they still are making, should be making enough income in each of the other 3 quarters that during which they are paid to qualify for unemployment compensation.
Okay, good. Let's see. Even if an employer is uninsured, the employee can still get PUA until July 31st, correct?
So that's what David and I were just talking about, that we believe that that's what's going to happen, and David's getting information that the Division of Employment Security is trying to pursue that.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, I see another question here. Let's see, the increase 600 is until the end of July. Part of PUA, however, something just showed 39 weeks. So the 39 weeks, that's a separate program. So the 600 goes through the end of July. The maximum length under all of these laws for somebody to get unemployment compensation would be a total of 39 weeks. That's at the state rate, which again, Missouri is a max of 320 per week. So 30 up to 39, and I'll stress, somewhere between 33 and 39 in the state of Missouri would be paid at a max rate of 320 per week. And then if they're getting even $1 of compensation in unemployment insurance from the state, that's when they're entitled to that additional $600 per week through the end of July. So I hope that clears that up a little bit.
A question from Rabbi Rose, and when should employers advise employees? Doesn't this open the organization to a lawsuit?
So let's see, when should the employers advise? Yeah, I want to make sure I'm understanding the question properly. So, obviously, if you're laying somebody off, you should let the individual know that they can apply to the Missouri Division of Employment Security for unemployment compensation. Again, you can generally tell them that there are federal programs that may allow the unemployment to go for as long as 33 to 39 weeks. There's also some additional federal unemployment compensation that's available. But as David said before, you won't know if you're entitled to anything until you apply. And so I think that you need to tell employees at the time of layoff that they need to make their application. I don't think that advising the employees that they need to apply for unemployment opens the organization up to a lawsuit.
Any other questions? I think we've covered all if there's a question that I haven't asked yet. Are there any other questions? A couple of minutes left if anybody has a question.
Yeah, and like I said, definitely, hopefully you guys were able to grab that link that I put in the chat box that the Jewish Federation of North America put out some pretty good guidance that is largely in question and answer format that may answer some of these questions for you.
Hey, Bert, there is another question from Patricia Harris. Are self-employed workers eligible, such as home daycare providers?
Yeah, so that's part of one of those new programs that we talked about that that expanded unemployment to historically ineligible people. And so people who were self-employed may be able to get health or unemployment insurance at this point. But again, we won't know until they actually apply.
Any other questions?
Hey, just real quickly, Bert, that I believe is in your slide that you gave. People that are traditionally in the gig economy, self-employed, if their workflow drops off because of the pandemic and the state of emergency.
At 10:30.
Okay.
Okay.
So I think that I think the answer to that, we're safe.
Invitation went out.
We're safe in that one. That's a yes.
Okay, very good.
Okay. Any other questions? I'm going to share a screen, and I think it's similar, but David got a website. He's suggesting that's a key website. I think it's I'm going to share my screen here.
And that website is right off our State Department of Labor. I think that's really good. It also has the links for your employees when they want to actually apply. They can go right online and do that. It's a lot of Bert's information and the information on this website are the same. There's overlap, but that actually has the links to do the application, and they're updating their FAQs. So all these questions, as they come into the department, they've been actually really good. I mean, I've been really impressed with the Department of Labor and Industrial Relations, the way that they've kept up with these conversations.
Okay. Other questions come in. Is my understanding that if an employer is using PPP loan, employees are not eligible for PUA? Have you heard that?
Let's see. I have heard that's sounding familiar. I'm actually looking at a little bit of guidance here. I don't have the answer for you offhand on that, but I have heard something along those lines. David, do you have any insight on that one?
So I want to make sure I understand the question. The question is, if your employer gets the PPP program, but nonetheless lays an employee off, is that employee's benefit rendered ineligible because the employer received a PPP benefit? Don, is that the question?
Yes, that's the question.
That seems completely inconsistent with the law. What'll happen to the employer is if they get a PPP check and they start laying their employees off and the employees are collecting unemployment, that PPP check will likely not be forgivable. It will translate into a 1% interest loan. I believe
that only applies beyond June 30th. So if someone furloughed their employee already prior to April 24th, 27th, I don't remember the exact date. So then that employee could be on unemployment until June 30th. So what's going on during that window?
That's what I'm trying to say. The window that you're looking at for PPP, kind of the forgivability window, which is essentially what that 8-week window is, determines whether or not the employer is subject to repayment or not. And then if the employer is subject to repayment, then they have to repay at 1%. I forgot the rest of those six months, whatever it is. But I do not believe this would affect the employee. And an unemployed employee is an unemployed employee. And so we will get confirmation about that through some of our federal sources, but I have seen nothing that suggests that the employee is penalized because the employer took a PPP loan.
Yeah, there's I think it was Hillel who answered that question. If you look at the guidance on Jewish Federation of North America's website, question 9, they ask, is a nonprofit that voluntarily pays SUTA eligible for the 50% reimbursement under Section 2103 if it receives a PPP loan under Section 7A of the Small Business Act? And they provide an answer there. That may be getting to your question. I'm not quite sure. They do give an answer there that's what I think I've read. That's consistent with what I've read in the past, if that's what your question is.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you to everybody this morning. Thanks for joining us. Just a reminder that next Tuesday morning, the 5th at 10:30, we're going to have another video conference titled "The PPP Loan, Now What? Maximize Forgiveness and Avoid Pitfalls." And I will tell you that the guidance on that, that'll be with Jeff Sparks, Ruben Brown, and Victoria Gilbert from Thompson Coburn. Yeah, I will tell you the guidance on that is changing in some alarming ways. Hopefully we'll get some clarity that we can talk about next week. So that'll be, by the way, that's we're real excited about the fact that this is it's a partnership that we're sharing with United Way of Greater St. Louis. So it'll be probably a pretty large number of people participating. So if you have any questions before then, just shoot them to us at cares@jfedstl.org. That's cares, C-A-R-E-S, at jfedstl.org. We're going to try to put an advanced list of questions together so that we can be sure to hit the highlights as we go through. So anyway, thank you to everyone for participating. I hope this helped. I thank you, Bert and David, for your expertise and knowledge of things that most of us don't deal with every day. And if there's any other questions, just let us know. Thank you. Have a wonderful day, and see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.